Hey, welcome back for another video. I hope this video is a little shorter than some of my previous videos. It's going to be pretty straightforward. This is a continuation of the mantle and built-ins that previous uploads have included. In this particular video, I'm going to be turning this pile of wood into this finished shelf. The first step I'm doing here is I took some pieces of MDF, ripped them down to 1.5 inches wide. I'll put them on the front of the shelves as a band. This will create a much stronger shelf and prevent sagging in the future. Gluing them on and then just shooting a few 23 gauge pin nails in. That'll be plenty strong enough. The glue will do the lion's share of the holding. The nails are more or less just until things dry. Always try to leave a little bit on the ends and as well as on the top, where I can come back later with a flush trim router bit and trim a little bit off, even if it's just a 1/16 or so. Also, always try to shoot the nails with the nail gun turned perpendicular. This oftentimes will prevent the nails from bending or blowing out the top or the bottom. Now that the glue's good and dry on this shelf, next thing I'm going to do is a little bit of cleanup prior to sanding. For this particular process, I use a router bit that I got from Whiteside. This router bit does two different things at the same time. It will flush trim what I call the edge banding to the shelf, making a flat surface or an even plane. It'll also cut a small micro V between in the joint where the edge banding and the shelf come together. In traditional lumber, not MDF, this is good to hide any imperfections. If there's a bow in the wood and it dips down and maybe it's a little lower than the shelf, it'll help to hide that. It's also good for seasonal acclimation and changes in the wood. If that gap or that joint doesn't stay perfectly tight, in the winter when the wood draws up, this will help to hide that because there's already a crack, so to speak, in the wood. Here you can see it kind of up close. So it's just a super small little micro V, probably an 1/8 wide, a 1/16 inch deep. And it's a 1/4 inch shank router bit. Here you can see it, and that's the point that does the little micro V, and just a straight knife that flushes everything up. In building these shelves, there's actually going to be two almost identical units, a left and a right side for a fireplace. One unit is about 2 inches wider than the other side. So what I did was batch cut all my shelves, cutting the same width, which would be the depth of the shelf, all the same on 6 pieces, knowing that I could come back later and adjust the length. I like doing this anyway because it allows me to square everything up once it's put together and I have the face frame on. It's also good when you're routing. You don't have to be as cautious with the router and the roundover bit and the flush trim bit that I used previously. If you get to the end and go around the edge or go around the corner a little bit, it doesn't matter. Versus if you had already cut it to length and you round it over the corner, you're not going to have a nice tight fit. Alright, I'm going to try to explain my layout method. So this is the side piece for the shelf. What I ended up doing, so the shelf side is a little longer. What that's going to allow me to do is have a piece at the top as a nailer for crown molding that's going to wrap these shelves. But anyway, so what I did here on my math was I took the height from the base of the shelf side or the base cabinet that it's sitting on top of and figured up my total height from that bottom point all the way to the underside of my top. I knew I wanted to have 3 shelves, each having that 1.5 inch face frame. So 3 shelves will create 4 bays because the first shelf is not at the bottom. the countertop of the base cabinet as actually kind of a fourth shelf. Anyway, 3 shelves creates 4 spaces. So I took the total height, I think it was like 65 inches, and subtracted 4.5, which is 3 face frames, and divided that by 4. That will give me the measurement from the bottom to the top of the first shelf, and then from the top of the first shelf to the top of the next shelf, and so on and so forth. Then when it's all said and done, I'll have equal reveals, even with that overhang of the shelves of the face frame. So when I laid everything out, one thing I took a little extra time to do was use a speed square and just wrap the lines around so they would be on both faces. One being where the shelf goes, and the other side so I'd know where my nails and screws need to go, so I didn't blow out the shelf or go through the side and make a big hole. All I'm doing here is a little bit of Type Bond 3. The reason I use Type Bond 3 is because I don't know what the difference is, but I seem to like it the best. It probably does have a longer drying time than original or Type Bond 2, so I like the little extra bit of time to work with it. But I glued it up and then shot a few of the 23 gauge pins in. For stuff like this, I like that over an 18 gauge nail gun, because the nails aren't for strength, they're just to hold it until I can get my screws in there. The pin nails also allow enough play to where if I was off my line or something when I shot the nail in, I could take my hand and just bump it into place. After I got them nailed, I ran in some GRK cabinet screws. I believe they were 2 inches in length. So all in all, it's going to be a super strong joint. I'm also going to have beadboard lining the back of these shelves, 1/4 inch beadboard. That will get stapled all along the sides as well as into the shelves. That's going to help the shelves not sag and just tie everything together and make a super strong shelf. All my assembly was done here on the table saw because that was the only surface large enough to hold everything up. I very carefully spun it around before putting the other side on. Normally could just work in the driveway, maybe put a piece of MDF on top of some sawhorses, but most of this project I've been doing late at night or early mornings, so I had to keep it in the garage. Didn't bother to countersink these screws. Doesn't matter if the heads stick out a little bit because I will put a piece of face frame on each side that's wider than the shelf. Because I was assembling on the table saw as my biggest surface and it was still smaller than the shelves, I ended up having to put the top on after the fact. The top is kind of the ceiling of the shelf, if you will. So I ended up just taking a few scrap pieces, clamping them to each side, and then putting some glue above where the shelf is going to go, hoping it would kind of smear as it went into place. Also, this guy hadn't figured out that he hasn't cut it to length yet, so I get to take it off again in a second. But the shelves and the top were all cut 3/4 inches narrower than the sides. That's going to get disguised by putting a nailer on the back, which is perpendicular to this top. And that'll allow me something to run some screws through into the wall when I find some studs to hold it securely. After screwing and nailing that top piece in, I put the nailer that I'd mentioned in, just like a 2.5 inch wide piece of MDF. It's nailed and screwed on the ends, and it's also screwed into that top piece with 2 or 3 screws. I put another strip very similar at the bottom of the shelf. This will help hide the beadboard when it comes down so it won't be flimsy. I won't have to tack it into the wall. I left it about a 1/16 inch up from the very bottom, knowing that I could come back and caulk that, or if my countertop is not perfectly flat. Now I've got it laid down. I've got so much room in this shop, so that was the only place it would fit. But I think what I'm talking about here is the fact that I'm going to square everything up. So measuring diagonal until I get the same measurement, and then putting the piece of beadboard on that I've cut to the height, and I'll staple one side flush, get a corner flush, and then just work my way around the other sides, squaring the shelf up to the beadboard, which has factory edges on 3 sides, so I know it should be good and square. So my shelf should end up good and square after doing that. Alright, here we go with the stapler. So I've got one end flushed up. I think I went ahead and did the side off camera. Got everything flushed up and checked for square. As always, keeping the nail gun 90 degrees to the surface I'm nailing into, in this case the shelves and those nailers at the top and the bottom. Because if anything, the staples or nails are going to go left or right. So in doing this, if they do that, it's just more shelf or more side or whatever piece it is. Not a big deal. A lot less chance for a blowout. Spent a lot of time with a pair of channel lock pliers or vice grips, different things, trying to pull nails out or wiggling them till they break. So this trick has really been handy. Once I got everything stapled into place, stood it up, and I'll show y'all now kind of what it's going to look like finished. Thought it was worthy of a picture, I guess. So here we are, kind of mocked up what it's going to end up looking like for the most part, with the exception of the top face frame, which will be wide enough to have an even reveal from the sides to what will be at the top, and then I'll have a piece of 5 1/4 cove crown molding, but I'll end up with about 2 inches on each side and then along the top under that crown molding. One thing I will say to my future self that I wish I knew here would have been to maybe do a little bit of the painting before assembly, at least like that piece of beadboard. It would have been nice to just paint the whole sheet and then put it on. Here I'm talking about that top face frame, but I left those wide on purpose, so I'll end up putting those in place on site, scribing them to fit the shelf and leaving them about a 1/4 inch reveal towards the inside of the shelf, and then I'll cut that top piece to fit. I did go ahead and take a router bit, a 1/8 inch round over, and round over most of that face frame for the inside, stopping a little short just so I know where that top rail will be, or if I need to trim a little off of those. I don't want to have my joint have a rounded over part. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out, and I'll show y'all some pictures of how it's coming along. Alright, here's a few still videos. Didn't feel like it was the appropriate thing to do to record any of this in the home where I was working, but just thought I'd share a little bit of progress. Still got a little bit more painting to do. I've just done some brush work so far, kind of cutting in everything, painting the trim. Haven't got the roller out yet, so the area where the TV is going to go is also going to have the same paint color. I think they want to come back and put one of the frame televisions up. So I think this is really going to be a nice focal point for the end user. I hope this video inspires you a little bit to know I'm working out of a 19-foot square garage with low ceilings and 2 outlets. And so it's not the most conducive space to do some fine woodworking, but I'm trying to kind of inspire you to show you that you don't need an elaborate professional woodworking shop to do good work. I think this looks pretty good. I think it looks pretty professional even. Didn't spray paint anything, just used a brush and a roller and some good quality paint. So again, I hope this inspires you to get out in your garage and create something awesome. If anything needs going over further, feel free to comment that below, and maybe I can make a separate video showing some of the steps more in depth. As always, I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you later.